The reason I came to France begins in this small village here in southern Scotland. This is where 4 of my family members left from and went to France to fight in the First World War. Only one of those 4 men returned. On the 11th of November 2018, I stood here at this war memorial during the 100-year armistice celebration, and I heard my family members' names being read out. As I stood right here on that day, I made a decision. I would make the journey to France. The First World War was fought from 1914 until 1918. In January 1916, conscription was imposed in Great Britain on all single men between the ages of 18 and 41, but exempted certain people and workers. If you ask people to name a battle of the Great War, the names that often come to mind are the Somme, the Mud of Passchendaele, or even perhaps the Battle of Loos. However, one that is often not mentioned is the Battle of Arras, which happened in 1917. Over 100 years ago, on the 9th of April 1917, a huge army was assembled in the historic town of Arras in northeast France. Many of the soldiers were Scottish or Canadians with Scots heritage. The proportion of Scottish soldiers involved was higher than any other battle of the First World War. Lasting approximately 5 weeks until May the 16th, the Battle of Arras concluded in a stalemate, resulting in around 160,000 casualties for the British and 125,000 casualties for the Germans. An estimated 18,000 Scottish were killed during the Battle of Arras. It was during the Battle of Arras that 2 of my family members were killed. So I've made it to the Arras Memorial, and this is to commemorate the men, over 35,000 men who lost their lives in the Battle of Arras and in the Arras area. Inside this memorial, 2 of my family members' names are listed. They were declared missing and there's no actual grave. So the people who don't have a grave are listed on the wall inside the memorial. So I'm going to try and find their names on the wall. Lots of cars are just driving past, people are going to work, and it looks like I might be the only person here. The Arras Memorial was designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, a renowned British architect responsible for several First World War memorials. Construction of the memorial began in 1929, and it was unveiled on July the 31st, 1932. The massive white walls are inscribed with the names of over 34,000 soldiers who went missing in action in the Arras sector during the spring of 1916 to August 1918. There's absolutely no one here. It's really huge and there are just thousands and thousands of names listed. So I've had a look around and it seems that the names are separated into the different battalions that they were in. So for example, behind me, I can see the Wiltshire Regiment and all the names are listed alphabetically under. People have left pictures of their relatives, which is really nice. There was one that I saw over here, it's been encased in plastic, which is really nice because it doesn't get damaged. On the back is the information about the person. I can see Gordon Highlanders, Seaforth Highlanders, Durham Light Infantry, York and Lancaster Regiment, North Staffordshire Regiment. Over here I saw the Royal Irish Rifles, Royal Munster, Cameron Highlanders, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. Inside the memorial here you can check for a name. So here in France, I have 3 relatives who lost their lives in the First World War, and 2 of them lost their lives in Arras and are mentioned here on the memorial. However, the 2 that are here in Arras aren't related to each other. So I'll try and explain in a simple way about it for those of you who are interested. So my great-grandfather was one of 5, and he had 2 younger brothers who lost their lives in the First World War. So the older one was William. He was 22 years old, and he's mentioned here in Arras. The younger brother is called George, and there is a grave for him, but it's elsewhere, and he died a bit later in the war. My great-grandfather was married, and his wife, who was my great-grandmother, her brother died here in Arras, and he was 34 years old. His name was Thomas. So William and Thomas are mentioned here at the Arras Memorial. William and Thomas would have known each other. They were from the same small village in Scotland, and obviously there was the family marriage and connection, and they were part of the same battalion also. William was already a part-time soldier, and he had been trained up and was working in the family business. He wasn't married and had no children. Thomas had inherited a business from a family member and was married but didn't have any children. I'm going to walk around now and see if I can find the battalion listed and try and find their names. So my 2 relatives were part of the regiment called King's Own Scottish Borderers, and I've just spotted it behind here. So I'm going to check if their names are there. I can see both the names listed there, so it's broken down into their position or their rank. So there's different ranks like private, lieutenant, sergeant, lance sergeant. So depending on, so you have first the battalion, and then you have the rank, and then the names are listed under. And it just mentions the last name and then the first or middle name initials. There's just so many names. So many names. All of these people had families. So many tears must have been shed for all these people. Beside the Arras Memorial is the Faubourg de Amiens Cemetery, which contains the graves of Commonwealth soldiers laid to rest during the war. So I think it starts in chronological order, and as I'm going down, then it's this line is the 23rd and 24th of April. Here we have the 4th of May, 9th of May, 11th of May, 16th of May. So you can see how many people were killed every single day. Sat down here just above are my relatives' names, and I wondered why so many people were missing. And I spoke to one of my older relatives who's done a lot of research about the war, and he's also been here to France, and he said to me that basically there wasn't much left of the bodies, so that's why they're listed as missing, and it wasn't possible to make a grave. Here at the Arras Memorial, there's actually someone working and they're maintaining the grave. So I've seen them going around and cleaning and also trimming weeds and things like that. So it's amazing the care that's being taken here at this site. I'm back at the van now. I'm really glad that I went to the Arras Memorial and came here to France to see it. I've wanted to come for such a long time, and it feels different when you go to a place like that and you have relatives there. I've visited many graveyards and cemeteries around the world, but when it's your own family, it's really more impactful. Next, I'm going to drive slightly north of Arras and try and find the grave site of my other relative, George. I've driven around 50 minutes north of Arras to the cemetery that I was looking for, and in the cemetery another of my relatives is buried, and he passed away a year after the Battle of Arras in 1918. As I drove in to the cemetery, I noticed on the entrance it says 1918, so a lot of the people in this cemetery were probably killed in 1918. This cemetery is a much smaller size of cemetery compared to the one in Arras. Okay, let's go in. So it is bitterly cold. Yesterday it was around -4 during the day. It didn't even go above -4, and then overnight it was -7. So I can't imagine what it must have been like back in the First World War when people had to live in trenches in this weather without proper clothing. All that clothing they had back then would have been so damp, and oh, it would have been brutal. As I've come in, I've noticed that the graves nearest the entrance are dated June, so he's probably over this side. I came across the grave here. It's quite interesting because this grave has a little bit of space on each side. In other parts of the cemetery, the stones are very close together. There's not much gap at all. So I wonder why there is that bigger gap for some of the stones. George was in the Black Watch battalion. The older family member of mine who's done a lot of research about the war, he thinks the reason why George was in the Black Watch was because early on in the war, usually the soldiers would be grouped together into battalions based on the area that they were from. That would increase morale, and also there were people that they knew inside the same battalion. However, if that battalion suffered heavy losses, it could mean that all the men who'd gone to war from that village or that parish would be wiped out, and there'd be really heavy losses. So later on in the war, they tried to split it up a bit more and mix it up. So that's why we think George was in the Black Watch instead of the King's Own Scottish Borderers. George was only 18 when he died, and he was working in a bank in a local town. And then he was called up, and he'd been very upset, apparently, about the death of his older brother William a year prior. He left Scotland saying, "I'm going to get revenge on those who killed my brother." George arrived in France in April 1918, and a few days after arriving was very badly wounded, and then he passed away from his injuries and his wounds and was buried here. The gravestone also mentions about William, George's brother. William and George's oldest brother Robert was not married and also fought in the war. However, he survived and was the only one of my 4 family members to return home. So at each of the cemeteries there's a plaque which tells you what happened and tells you a brief history. It contains 1,081 burials of soldiers who fell during the 1918 German offensive. 1,031 were British, 27 Canadian, 3 Australian, 5 South African, 11 Indian, 1 West Indian, and 3 French. And here there are also 18 graves of British servicemen of the Second World War. Inside the cemetery register is a list of all the people who are here, and you can look up your last name. You can find more information. So I'm going to search. It says he died of wounds, which we already knew. It says his age and also his parents' names and where he was from, and the grave reference. There's so many Scottish people here, many from Glasgow, Stirlingshire, and there's also a visitor's book, and people have left messages saying who they're visiting. Many people are visiting their great uncles, somebody visiting their great grandfather. Over the course of the First World War, over 880,000 British forces died. In March 1915, to avoid the unsanitary transportation of war casualties, the British government issued a ban on the exhumation and repatriation of soldiers. This cemetery is one of 2,945 locations in France, which is taken care of by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. This video and this trip to France has been possible to film thanks to MyHeritage. In recent years, I've become very interested in my family history and family tree. MyHeritage is a website where you can build your own family tree, and search over 19 billion historical documents for family records. I quickly found old census records from 1901 that revealed some quite interesting information about my family that I didn't know. I also discovered a birth record of my great-great-grandmother who was born in 1850, and I found out she was born in the same village I live in now, which is so nice to think that I have a family connection to my village. There's also a feature called Instant Discoveries. This helps identify matching family members in other people's trees through photos and information. My favourite part of MyHeritage though is the photo feature. I uploaded the photos of my relatives who died in France to MyHeritage, and I was able to colorise them, enhance them because they're quite grainy old photos, and I was even able to animate them and give them voices. If you'd like to try out MyHeritage and make your own family tree, research family records and bring your old photos to life, you can check out the link below. MyHeritage are offering a 14-day free trial. Now let's head to the next location. I wanted to find out more about the Battle of Arras, so I headed back to Arras to visit Vimy Ridge. I've made it here to Vimy Ridge, which is a very important place and was part of the Battle of Arras. Behind me here is a huge memorial for Canadian soldiers. So this area was where a lot of Canadian soldiers were fighting, and also over 3,500 Canadian soldiers lost their lives here. I just noticed behind me here there's trenches, so they're just right here beside the car park. Obviously it's over 100 years ago, so the trenches have been filled in a little bit over time, but you can still see the outlines of where the trenches were, which is really incredible. As I'm walking along the path towards the Canadian Memorial, I've seen a lot of groups of children, French children on school trips here. On the left side of the path are more trenches, and there's signs on the fence just before the trenches saying danger. So on the front of the memorial it says, "To the valour of their countrymen in the Great War and in memory of their 60,000 dead, this monument is raised by the people of Canada." The Battle of Vimy Ridge started on April 9th, 1917. It was a part of the larger Arras offensive, where 4 Canadian divisions, fighting together for the first time, sought to take control of the strategically important Vimy Ridge from the German army. The ridge was heavily fortified, and previous attempts by the French and British had failed to capture it. The Canadians achieved a victory by capturing the ridge, marking a turning point in the war. In recognition of the sacrifices made and the significance of the victory, the Canadian National Vimy Memorial was constructed on the ridge and was unveiled on July 26, 1936. The memorial stands as a tribute to the 11,285 Canadian soldiers who lost their lives in France during World War I and have no known grave. The site of this memorial is really huge. There's a lot of places you can walk, so I'm going to walk a little bit further away and see the memorial from a distance. So I've reached the point where you can see the memorial in the distance, and then I believe this is Vimy Ridge in front, and then we have this woodland area, and in front of the woodland area there's an electric fence which you can see here, and then there's this red sign which says danger, no entry, undetonated explosives. Wow. Even 100 years later, there's still undetonated explosives. That is crazy. This area is called the Oaks of Remembrance. So one of the combats, he took some acorns from this area and then grew oak trees in Canada, and then they were replanted here in memory of all the Canadian soldiers. I next decided to visit the nearby Canadian Cemetery. A lot of the Commonwealth war graves, probably all of them, it has a cemetery register. Here's some information, and it mentions that there's nearly 3,000 casualties here that died between 1914 and 1918. So inside the books there's usually a map here of the cemetery, and then all the names are listed in alphabetical order. And it gives you the reference for the grave so you can easily find it. As I come into this cemetery, one of the first things I'm noticing is the gravestones that are unidentified people. So it says on the gravestone, a soldier of the Great War. Their regiment is mentioned if known, and then underneath it says known unto God. And I haven't seen any of these unidentified graves before, but there's quite a lot here when you first walk in. I found 2 graves here, soldiers of the Great War from the King's Own Scottish Borderers, so my 2 family members who went missing in Arras. This could potentially be their grave. It's quite nice to think. Imagine if they're actually both of them buried together. It's highly, highly unlikely, but it's nice just to think that anyway. Like in all the cemeteries, there's a plaque with information. And even though this one's called the Canadain Cemetery number 2, it actually has 2,241 British, 693 Canadian, 2 Newfoundland, 19 Australian, 7 New Zealand, and 2 South African. So there are many British here. Could be that my family members are buried here. Before I'm leaving, I quickly checked the dates of death and also the war diaries, which I have from my older relative, to check what date that my relatives died, the ones that were in the King's Scottish Borderers. And it's really weird because one of them, he died on the 1917, and actually in this line there's other dates mentioned. Imagine if this is his grave. Oh my goodness. There's probably thousands and thousands of people from the King's Own Scottish Borderers who died, but it's really odd that it's exactly the same date in this line of graves. It's always very emotional and tough going to those war cemeteries. It feels so much more harder than a regular cemetery, because when you go to a regular cemetery, a lot of people died there from old age, they'd lived long lives already. But in these war cemeteries, you struggle to even see a grave of someone who's over the age of 40. So many of the ages are in the 20s and 30s, and all these people who just lost their lives. Now I've made it to a place which I think will be very difficult to see. This behind me is the largest French war cemetery in the world. The reason I came here is because there's something opposite which I only found out about a few days ago, and it sounds really interesting, and there might be some connection to my family's names on here too, so that's why I've come here. I'm going to go in and have a look. Notre de Lorette is the world's largest French military cemetery, where over 40,000 bodies have been laid to rest. Almost all the graves here are from the First World War. So the graves are slightly different to the Commonwealth graves that I've seen in the other cemeteries. So these stones are crosses, and it mentions the name, the date of death, maybe that's their regiment, and then died for France. Wow, that's very symbolic. There's the very occasional grave that is a different shape. So as you can see, the other graves are crosses, and then this one's not. Inside this memorial, it said that every soldier, no matter the nationality, that died in this area of France is listed here. So if this is the case, my 3 relatives should be listed here. So I'm going to try and look for their names. Wow. My goodness, it's huge. So here's a summary. So this memorial pays a tribute to the memory of the soldiers who fell in the Nord and in the Pas de Calais between 1914 and 1918. 580,000 names are listed in alphabetical order, without any distinction made between rank or nationality. Former enemies and friends side by side. Includes 294,000 soldiers from the British Empire, including English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, Canadians, Australian, New Zealanders, South African and Indians, and then also German soldiers, but not including missing, 174,000. And then French soldiers, 106,000, and then 2,300 Belgian, and then Portuguese and Russian and Romanian. As you come in on this side, we have A, and then it works its way around alphabetically. They split properly, so for example, you can see the start of the name. So here's ARN, and then it lists Arnold. Lots of Arnolds, people with Arnold as the last name. The Ring of Remembrance was erected in 2014. 40% of Great War soldiers have no known grave. This monument provides a place for their names to be remembered, commemorated, and honoured. The first name inscribed belongs to a Nepalese sailor, and the last belongs to a German soldier. A distinct font, named the Lorette, was specifically designed for this unique memorial. I'm going to look for my family members' names now. I just found one of my family members. He's listed here. It's nice that he's remembered both at the Arras Memorial and also here. It seems like he's the only one with this last name. One of my best friends is from Germany. I was walking past his last name, and there's hundreds of people who died in the war with his same last name. It's unbelievable that our relatives were killing each other, and then 4 generations later, we're best friends. So I arrived at the M section, and there are many McDonald's. Many of them probably from Scotland. So I found my family members listed here. However, there's also another family member that I don't know about, and I'm going to try and check if he's part of the same family tree, because he potentially could be. My great-grandfather's father was one of 11, I believe, and many of his brothers and sisters moved to different countries. Some of them went to Canada. I think quite a few of them went to Canada, America, and then there were some that also went to Australia and New Zealand. So perhaps this person was a descendant of those siblings who moved to different countries. As I arrived here at the family name, another person came. So this place is completely empty, there's no one here. And it was a young French guy on a bicycle, and he pulled up right beside my family name. And like out of the whole place, his family name was right beside mine. So we're showing each other which names they are. And it was his great-grandfather, he was pointing out the name. How crazy is that? Like right beside each other. So he was saying his grandmother, he's from near here, and he said his grandmother is quite involved in organising events here at this place. This place is really worth coming to, especially if you have any family members that were lost in the war, because all the names are listed there. The French cemetery is vast. It just goes on and on and on. And there's another school trip here, some French students. It's really interesting that French students are coming here on school trips. I really need to emphasise how cold it is. Like the soldiers would have lived in the trenches in this weather, in this bitterly cold January weather. It is so horrible. I've so far visited the Commonwealth graves and also the French graves, and the final place I'm going to visit is the largest German war cemetery here in France. This place is something else. It's huge. I just can't even contemplate the number of people here. And this isn't even all of them, because there are mass graves here as well. The Neuville-St Vaast German War Cemetery is the largest German war cemetery in France, with 44,833 burials, including 8,040 unidentified soldiers. Established by the French government in 1919, it serves as a collective resting place for German Empire war dead. The cemetery is now managed by the German War Graves Commission, and was reorganised between 1975 and 1983. Wooden crosses were replaced with metal ones engraved with soldiers' details. The site includes 129 stone grave markers, displaying the Star of David for Jewish German soldiers. Relics from World War I, including small fortifications, are also preserved within the cemetery. What I find crazy about this place is how big it is. It's 45,000 people buried here, and I'm the only living person here. There's no one else here. The whole place, just me. So many of these would have just been young boys forced into war through conscription. Alfred Gall, and then this was his position, musketeer. I've seen this word a lot. And then this person's position was Krijgsvrijwilliger. I was doing some research after visiting the big war memorial with 500,000 names. I saw another name from my family on that war memorial, and I'm really convinced that that person's a relative of mine. I checked online, and this person with the same last name was a Canadian soldier. And this person's name is mentioned on the Canadian War Memorial, which I was at the other day, which is unbelievable. So I want to go back to this Canadian War Memorial and see if I can find this name before I leave France. I'm back here at the Canadian Memorial, and today the weather is so much nicer. It really stands out against the blue sky behind. Wow, it's so cold. I'm going to go and check now and see if I can find the name. So here's all the names on the Canadian Memorial. So they're split by the last name. So for example, there's O and then all the names there. I'm searching, but it's quite difficult to find the names because they're split via their rank. I don't know the rank, I forgot. So I'm going to check through every rank and then try and find the name. I found it. I really wonder if anyone's ever been to see this, because I don't know if this person had any children. I don't know if they had any family. Perhaps people have come from Canada to visit this and I don't know who they are. I'm going to have to do some research. I really want to find out about this Canadian side of the family that had this relative who died in the First World War. I was doing some further research also about the grave that I found in the Canadian Cemetery, the grave of someone from the King's Own Scottish Borderers, an unknown soldier who died on the same date as my relative. So I checked on the Commonwealth Graves website, which is absolutely excellent, by the way. And on there, I tried to find out how many men from the King's Own Scottish Borderers died and were declared missing on that same day. So there were 150 men who are mentioned at the Arras Memorial who died on that same date. That means there's a 1 in 75 chance that grave, one of those graves, belongs to my relative potentially. And I keep thinking, why did I come here to this Canadian memorial? I don't know why I came here. It's really strange that I came here because I don't have any Canadian relatives that I know of. It's really odd. I think I came here because I thought, oh, maybe Vimy Ridge is a important place that was part of the Battle of Arras, but I've got this connection now to this other relative who was Canadian. And when I went into the Canadian Cemetery, like I don't know why I went there. Why did I go to the Canadian Cemetery? It's such an odd place for me to go. And why did I walk down this line of graves and it was the exact date of someone from the same battalion? It feels very coincidental, and I just have a really weird feeling about this place. And it's almost like I was drawn to that grave for some strange reason. And deep down, I believe that it could be my relative, which probably sounds completely crazy, really, really crazy, but yeah, weird. I actually just came back to the Canadian Cemetery one last time. I walked around every single grave in there just to have another look and see if there were any more dates, but I found only one other soldier in that cemetery, which was the King's Own Scottish Borderers, and it was mixed in with a random group of dates. Yeah, quite a few graves in there from 1915 and then also 1918. So yeah, still I find that really odd. They're not even all from the Battle of Arras in that cemetery. So before I leave the Arras area, there's one final place that I want to visit. I found out about this place when I did the tour of the tunnels in Arras City. The tour guide mentioned about it. I feel it's important to visit this place before I leave. So let's get going. I've pulled up at the last place I want to come. It's beside a really busy highway, and this place is called Point de Jour. The reason I wanted to come here is because of this, the Scottish cairn. I believe this memorial is for all the Scottish people who were lost between the years of 1914 and 1918. The 9th Scottish Division Memorial was unveiled on April 9th, 1922. It was moved to this location in 2006 due to safety concerns from heavy traffic, and commemorates the 9th Scottish Division soldiers who served in the Great War. The 30-feet high cairn is constructed from granite blocks, and nearby are 26 granite boulders bearing the names of units that served in the division from 1915 to 1918. I'll go over and see if I can find the Black Watch and also the King's Scottish Borderers, the 2 battalions my family members were part of, and I'll also check what other ones are there too. So there's lots of names here. So I found here the 8th Battalion, the Black Watch, here's another one, 7th and 9th Battalions, the Seaforth Highlanders, 8th Battalion, the Gordon Highlanders, 5th Battalion, the Cameron Highlanders, 11th and 12th Battalions, the Royal Scots. There's the battalion that 2 of my family members were part of, the King's Own Scottish Borderers. And they also have the symbol here for the battalion printed on the stone. The Royal Newfoundland Regiment. I also saw the Scottish South African. There we go, the South African Scottish Regiment is also there. Opposite the cairn is the cemetery, Point de Jour, 1916 to 1918. I wonder if everyone buried in here is Scottish or if there's a variety of nationalities. So inside the cemetery I came across a grave for a French citizen here. That's the gravestone that they use in the French cemetery. And then, like every military cemetery, there is this big memorial that says, "Their name liveth forevermore." In the cemetery there's quite a few soldiers from the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. Here's many unknown graves, just says known unto God. Even though this cemetery has the Scottish cairn outside and the memorial for Scottish soldiers, inside the cemetery itself there doesn't seem to be that many Scottish soldiers. There are some, but I've come across a lot of South African graves and also just a mixture of different battalions from all over the UK. The death toll of Scottish soldiers in the First World War has been a topic of controversy, and some say that Scotland suffered disproportionately compared to other UK countries. Around 135,000 brave men and women from Scotland are reported to have died during the Great War. Around 20% of Scottish soldiers who joined the conflict died. When I look at my own family, the death toll was 75%. In Scotland today, almost every village and town has its own memorial to commemorate those who lost their lives in the Great War. I've wanted to come to France for such a long time, and this trip so far has been so emotional and moving for me. Next time, join me as I visit the Somme, the location of the deadliest day for British troops during the First World War. and I discover the grave of another family member who died there.